I'm going to go ahead and answer today's question. What is the most successful way to gain podcast listeners? That's all coming up next. Hey there, podcaster. My name is the Shan Man, radio broadcaster, podcaster, and a podcast producer. And today's video is brought to you by my latest ebook, The 6 Clever Ways to Monetize a Podcast, available right now through my website, theshanman.com. A link for that is down in the description below, along with a coupon code if you are looking for any type of discount on the particular book. But of course, it is all down there for you. And of course, the book is all about monetizing a podcast from A to Z. It takes my 20 years of radio knowledge and experience and puts it all into this ebook and shows you how we've not only monetized in radio, but how we can monetize on websites and in podcasts. It's all available on my website again at theshanman.com. So today we are answering the question that I had seen something inside of a Facebook group, what is the most successful way to gain podcast listeners? This is always an interesting question because I know that there's a lot of people out there that want to have a massive following that's subscribing to their podcast immediately and they want to get it really fast. And I'm going to just tell you right now, there is no magic bullet. There's no quick way to gain podcast listeners if you're starting from the very beginning. Even some of the most successful podcasters, it took them at least a year before they started seeing massive followings. Okay, now, the only other way that I know someone can have a massive following in terms of listeners are concerned is if you already have an email list. If you already got an email list of people who you are already in contact with, this is something that you would have collected through MailChimp. Maybe it's through Constant Contact, something of that nature. You can push people to listen to your podcast. That's the best and fastest way you can gain podcast listeners. And once you do that, of course, your podcast can start jumping up into the algorithm on Apple Podcasts or wherever people are getting their podcasts. And that's how you can gain listeners. Now, that's the way that it's typically and done smartly. Okay. Now, smartly, is that a word? But it's done the smart way that way. Okay. Now, let's talk about doing it from the organic and all natural way. All right. And how do we gain these podcast listeners? Now, I guess we could file this away as how to promote a podcast. And I got some videos down in the description that you might want to check out on how you can promote a podcast that might be able to help you out. Okay. There's different ways that you can promote your podcast and what you can create. Some of those videos are all about using social media as a means, or using something like Headliner, which there's a video series that I've created all about Headliner down in the description. So check those videos out. But let's start from the very ground. Let's start from ground zero, the very beginning. All right. And you're starting a podcast, and let's say you're a solo podcaster and you're creating a podcast that's all about, let's say, mental wellness or mental health or something like that. And you have something that you have to say every single day, and you create a brand new podcast every day, and it's about 10 to 15 minutes long, and you're just putting podcasts out there every single day, and you start seeing growth with your podcast. You start seeing the downloads tick up, but you're starting to run out of content that you want to say after, let's say, maybe 4 or 5 months. And you're like, well, what do I even say? Let's say that you're not even like that. Let's say you're able to create content for at least a good 2 years, but let's say you start getting burned out. All right. And you're like, well, what do I do? Well, what you're seeing first, probably, is that you're going to see an uptick in people listening to your podcast. There's probably people going to see like, oh yeah, she's releasing every single day, and I love that when she releases every single day, and I love what she has to say. It's her words of inspiration, it's her words of knowledge, it's whatever it may be, and you're starting to see major downloads. So creating a podcast every day can definitely help you gain more listeners, especially if it's from an organic source or an organic place that you're deciding to create it. But let's say that you are the solo podcaster that is releasing once a week, and all you're doing is releasing once a week a 20-minute podcast. All right. And that 20-minute podcast is of you talking about, let's say, surf gear, okay? And really, you're just not doing any other promoting other than putting it on social media, and it's not getting a whole lot of traction in the iTunes store, okay? Will you get more listeners? Well, you're probably going to get some listeners, but you're probably going to have to invest more time into creating, more of a social media promotional presence that is out on Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're deciding to do your promotion for your particular podcast. So that's one way that, you can get more listeners, but it's not the most effective way, okay? The most effective way to do this is that if you're sharing sharing consistently and you're promoting consistently, this will help you gradually grow your following. And of course, one of the most important things that I think that is there is that you have to ask for the share and you have to ask for the subscription inside of your podcast. All right. That is going to be the most important thing, because most people aren't proactive unless you tell them to do something. Think about this very channel. Every day when I check my email, I get brand new subscriptions to my YouTube channel, because I'm always asking people to not only hit the bell, but I'm always asking them to hit the subscribe button. And of course, it's already right there if they're watching inside of YouTube. So it's pretty easy whenever you're creating content, and they can just go ahead and hit the subscribe and bell button. All right. And of course, you can hit it right now if you're more than feeling very generous right now. But you also have to remember too that one of the things that's going to get people to come back and of course become a follower of your podcast is the content. The content has to be super quality. Okay. If you are a podcast that's talking about surfing, and it's specifically about surfing, and it's you and your buddy, and you interview someone on your podcast every week, and it's a different surfboarder, or I'm sorry, a surfer, or maybe it's a surf shop that you're interviewing, or it could be surfers across the world. Let's say that you're interviewing people who are really popular inside of the surfing space. All right, you might start getting more listeners, because what happens is once you interview those people who have, say, a decent following, let's say they only had 5,000 people on Instagram, and that's the largest that it's going to get, they're going to share your interview out onto their Instagram if you create something like a headliner, audiogram, and they're going to share that out onto their Instagram, and then of course they're going to want to hear what they had to say on your podcast. So it's all about a promotional game. It's about getting people, the right people on your podcast, and having them come in and listen to your podcast. So you're going to be doing this. It's basically like a collaboration, like what you see on YouTube. You've probably seen some collabs on YouTube where one creator will create a video for another creator, and it kind of goes back and forth, vice versa. In podcasting, this is kind of what it is, but you're just doing it as an interview. Okay. So when you're cross promoting each other's stuff, you're not only helping them gain followers or gain fans, but they are also bringing their audience over and helping you grow an audience as well. So it works very synergistic, and you're going to want to try and get some people in to try and start, becoming subscribers or becoming followers or listeners. All right. That's one way that you're going to want to do that. But I would recommend that you interview guests, because that is going to be the way that you can grow your podcast. If you're doing a solo podcast, you might want to consider interviewing someone, okay? But if you don't feel like you can interview someone, and you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you're more than welcome. I'm not saying that any of these strategies or tactics are going to be exactly perfect, but all I know in my years of radio and all I know in my years of doing online marketing is that it's all about sharing each other's audiences if there is a mutual and beneficial connection there between the two creators. I want to share with you one other tactic or trick that you can utilize to getting more people to come in and listen to your podcast. Years ago, I had started a comedy podcast with my friend Jimmy, and we were trying to figure out and answer the questions that you're asking too. How do we get more people to come in and listen to our podcast? And he had told me that he had listened to a podcast with Jay Moore. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Jay Moore. And someone on another podcast had asked Jay, how did you get people to come in and how'd you get so many subscribers to your podcast? And Jay answered, all you have to do is really just show up on other people's podcasts, because then you're sharing each other's content. So, if you're interviewing other people to come onto your podcast, you should be going on other people's podcasts and not only sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your humor, whatever it may be. You're sharing all of these things to someone else's audience that will intrigue them enough to come back and listen to your podcast, or watch your YouTube channel, or read your blog, or check out your Facebook Live. That's how this all works. So I recommend that you go out and you start showing up on other people's podcasts, because you're going to start seeing a following and a return on people coming back and wanting to learn more about you. Years ago, when Google Plus was a big thing, I remember we used to share audiences, and we would collab on different people's hangouts. And every Friday there was a different hangout, and you shared your expertise on something, and people would come in and they would want to learn more. And I'd never seen my email list grow faster than doing a collab with someone, whether it was I was with my friend Mia Voss, or I was with my friend Mike Alton, or Jeff C. These are all people in the business space that were doing something. And in turn, I had more people coming in, and they were curious about who is this long-haired guy, and why he talks about a lot of stuff about Google Plus and how to utilize it. Let's learn more about him. What is he talking about? I've never seen faster growth, than just sharing, one piece of content as opposed to going on someone else's show or podcast and having their audience come over and latch onto me. And actually, some of those people who had come over from Google Plus, they're now my colleagues and friends that I am still friends with to this day. So if I were to break it down one more time, I would recommend that you ask for the share and ask for the subscription in your podcast, whether you decide to put it in the beginning of the podcast or at the end of the podcast. I would ask for the share, ask them to subscribe, and ask them to share the podcast out with 5 of their friends. That's one of them. Number 2, interview guests and put them on your podcast and have them bring their audience over to listen to your podcast. You want to make sure that you have number 1 in place, that you're asking for the share and you're asking for the subscription to your podcast already in place whenever someone comes in and you are interviewing them. And number 3, show up on other people's podcasts. That's one good way to come in so people can learn more about you and get used to your personality and want to know more about what you have to offer, whether that be through education or entertainment in some way. Okay. So I hope these tips have really kind of helped you out and maybe will point you in the right direction. I know it's kind of along the lines of a promotion video that I've done in the past, but sometimes you need to be told once again what you need to do in order to get more podcast listeners to come in and subscribe to your podcast. There's more to this game that I share out on these other videos, and I will share out into the future with more strategies and tips on how to get more podcast listeners, but it's actually no big secret really, okay? Just make sure that you're sharing consistently, you're asking for the share, you're showing up on other people's podcasts, and you're interviewing other people, and that will hopefully grow your audience. If you like this video, go ahead and leave it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and next to the subscribe button is the bell so that you can go ahead and get notified whenever I drop another video right here on this YouTube channel. And of course, if you are a brand new podcaster or someone who's been in the space and are looking to upgrade their setup and need some equipment that they need to check out, I have an essential equipment guide that you can go ahead and check out. It's either going to be up here in the card on YouTube or down below in the description below. And any of the links that I have mentioned in this video today will be down in the description below. So again, you can check it all out right there. And of course, grab that free guide. It's available for you today. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching this week. I really appreciate it. There's a video at the very end that I think might help you out on the right-hand side of this particular embedded video. And we will talk to you next time. Take care.